Have you ever been in one of those parties, or maybe it's a family gathering, and something you're looking forward to, and you're sharing some great food around the table, you're shooting the breeze, you're sharing stories about what has taken place maybe the past week, or you're reflecting on that memory that took place a while ago, and you're just having a great time until one person who's at the dinner table, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's you, someone there just drops a bomb. They drop a bomb that you weren't expecting, and they share some news that changes really everything. It's something that happens that changes the trajectory of the night and of the meal. You ever had one of those moments, or have you been the person to drop that kind of bomb? It's a crazy experience to go through. Now, we're on week 5 of Leap of Faith, and in this series, we've been talking about Blaise Pascal's question, and what he thought is it rational to live the Christian life? I mean, to believe in God and to live out the Christian life, is that a rational belief? But we've taken that a step further, and we've been asking the question, is it irrational to live the life without believing in God? I mean, is that irrational to say that there is no God? And kind of debating that question. And really the whole idea is, could we maybe move from a place of unbelief to belief? And could you take that kind of leap of faith? Now, our theme passage for this series is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. And it reads like this. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Now, here's a breakdown of where we've been up to this point. We have talked about two main categories of people in this world. The people who believe in God and advocate on behalf of Him and live their lives in a way that God exists, right? And so if you have a family, you raise your family that way, you spend your money that way, you give of your time that way. But then there's a category of people who believe that God does not exist. And there's only really 2 ways to think here. And we've dealt with the people who believe that God does not exist, and we've kind of dismissed that thought. And it's really difficult to actually live that way, to live out your belief. And so if we're in the category of God exists, we also believe that there is good and evil. We see that in the newspapers. We watch that on TV. We believe that there is a heaven and a hell, and we believe that there is a God and Satan is also called the father of lies. And what he wants us to believe, and what he's very good at, is getting us to believe lies about ourselves and the world and the thought process about different paths in life. And so he would say there's more than 2 ways to live. There's multiple paths. And one of the things that he mentioned is there's a category called the agnostics. And I would say that is the largest demographic of Canadians. People who don't really have a foundation of what they believe, but they kind of make up their own kind of belief system. And we've kind of lumped those in really with atheists, that the agnostic doesn't really exist. And last week we dealt with the different world religions who advocate on behalf of a religion. And we really dismissed all those and said that Jesus is the only way. It's Jesus. Now, the thing that began the process of changing everything was what has happened in our passage that we're going to dive into here today. Specifically, Jesus' death and burial. And that's kind of where we're going today in today's teaching. And so they just share a meal. Jesus is sick to his stomach. He's contemplating what's about to happen. He's going through tremendous amount of weight in his mind and in his life. There's a spiritual battle taking place. And so he decides to leave the table, to go out to the garden and to pray. And there he has invited some of the disciples to come, and they're in close proximity of him, not right with him, but close proximity. And he is praying and he is pleading with God. There is an intense spiritual battle that is taking place as he is having a conversation with his father, with his dad. And he knew that incredible suffering was about to come. He knew what was about to take place. And the father of lies was pressing into him at this point, saying, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to go down this road. You don't need to go through with this. And as he waited for that ordeal to begin, he continues to pray, and he is under such pressure and such stress it actually records that he sweat out drops of blood as found in Luke 22:44. It says this, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. You ever been in a sickening situation where you're in the midst of temptation? I mean, when I find myself in situations like that, nothing compared to what Jesus is going through, but when temptation arises in my life, you know what the most comforting thing is? Is to have brothers and comrades who are alongside me to help me deal with the weight of that. And to come alongside me and to pray for me, or to come alongside me and to hold me accountable and to help me out in that process. But what's going on here is that the disciples fall asleep. And they're tired. They had a great dinner beforehand, and Jesus is left awake, praying under the pain and the pressure. The disciples just don't even know. They don't even get what is going on and what he's going through. Jesus is up on his own, praying about what's about to happen. And we pick it up here in Matthew chapter 26, 45 to 48. And it reads like this. He returned to the disciples and he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. And while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. And Jesus is betrayed. He's arrested, as we found out. He's put on mock trial, and he's presumed innocent by Pilate, the agnostic, but he is wrongfully convicted. And what Jesus endures before the crucifixion is equally or even greater pain than he experienced during his physical death. There would be different types of lashings the synagogue could administer based on the crime that was committed, but none of these were even remotely as close as scourging. In fact, it was against the law to scourge a Roman citizen at the time. It was meant to be humiliating. It was meant to be absolutely painful. In fact, they would describe it as worse than the way they would beat their animals in Roman culture. A person would be stripped of their clothing. They would be tied to a post and repeatedly struck. The whip, the scourge, would contain bone fragments, metal fragments, and tear the skin off the back and the back of the legs until bones were exposed. In fact, many died just from scourging alone. Pilate would have Jesus scourged in order to save his life, to appease the Jews, the mob who had gathered. And as he had him paraded like a false king with a crown of thorns and a purple robe, it had to be humiliating. We pick up the story in Mark 15, 12 to 39. We'll jump in here. It said, the soldiers led Jesus away to the palace and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And again they struck him on the head with the staff. They spit on him. And falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes. Then they led him out to crucify him. Now a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way from the country. And they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right, one on his left. And those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross. Why don't you save yourself?" And in the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, mocked him among themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe. Even those crucified beside him also heaped insults on him. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near him heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." And one man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes down to take him." With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." See, it's important for us to reflect on how much Jesus suffered in this moment. The different forms of pain and agony that he must have endured would be unimaginable. The mental pain as he hung on the cross and watched his mom witness all these events, leaving his own mother behind. The emotional and mental weight that he would bear in that moment as they tried to break him for the last 12 hours. The physical pain of having his body mutilated and slowly dying because he couldn't breathe. It's important to understand all those because perhaps the greatest pain that he endured didn't have to do with any of that. It had to do with the spiritual battle that had taken place over the last 12 hours. See, what we need to understand is that the wrath, the anger of God for all those choices, all those things we decided to do when we knew we shouldn't have done them. All those things that we've never brought up to our family members, to our coworkers, to our spouse. The embarrassing past, they all fell on Jesus that moment. See, he took the full blast of God's anger at us, the sin. He did it so that we wouldn't have to be there. He was unrecognizable when it was all done. Just as the prophet Isaiah predicted. See, his humiliation was awful. As he hung on that cross, he didn't even have clothes on. And people would be yelling at him, would be mocking him, would be spitting at him. And taking the shame that we feel about our past, he endured all that shame that you feel, all the embarrassment. He knows about it. He felt it. See, it wasn't a quick death, but something that lasted over 12 hours from the time of arrest till his last breath. A death that is historical fact. John I often wonder, as this guy's present, witnessing what is happening to Jesus, I'm wondering what is going through his head. Reflecting on the dinner that they just shared. I mean, we were just shooting the breeze 12 hours earlier. We were sharing memories. We were having a good meal. We were enjoying our time together. And now, 12 hours later, my leader, my rabbi, the guy I dropped everything to follow, my God, has just breathed his last breath. And as he watched his rabbi's limp body get taken from the cross and placed in a tomb, it was eventually sealed with a rock. What went through his head? What was there belief? Was there foundation? Was there hope? Was there everything they understood to be truth? Was it all sealed behind that rock in that tomb with the one who they thought was God? See, not only did the disciples know about the prophecies that Jesus would die but then be resurrected, they understood that, but it would have been hard to believe. But not only did they understood that, the Pharisees and the chief priests would have known that as well. And so just in case Jesus was who he said he was, they put precautions in place to seal that puppy shut. And so they rolled a 2-ton stone. And it would have been in a grooved kind of apparatus, and they would roll that downhill into the place that would fortify that tomb, that would close it and seal it up. So that in order to remove it, you would literally have to push 2 tons uphill to move it out of the way. They put the Roman signet on the seal of the tomb. And at the time, if you broke that seal, your punishment was death itself. And they established a Roman guard to guard over that whole tomb. A guard would have been made up of 16 Roman soldiers who all guarded the spot that Jesus was buried. You know, the Bible doesn't record the next time that the disciples sat down to share a meal. The next time we hear about it is in Acts chapter 2, verse 42, and it says, the disciples broke bread together. And so I can only imagine what the next time they shared a meal, what that would have been like. I don't know when it was, but I can imagine. Now imagine the disciples, they're huddled into a dark room, scared for their lives. Their leader, their rabbi, is sealed in a tomb, guarded by 16 soldiers. They're fearing for their lives, and as they sit there huddled in a room, it is silent. And their heads are hung in shame. And maybe one of them looks up to the others to see if anyone is looking around or what the response might be. Until one breaks the silence and says, what do you think we should do? What do we do now? And another one pipes up, well, I don't know. Until John, he says, I got it. And he jumps up and he bolts out of the door. And he says, I'll be back in 5 minutes, guys. And he heads out there. And 5 minutes later, he comes back through the door. And as the door opens into that dark room, the light is behind John. And there in the shadowy figure stands John. And in one hand, he holds a loaf of bread. In the other hand, he holds a jar of wine. And over the next little while, they share a meal. And the silence continues. And it's only broken by the sounds, the quiet sounds of bread breaking off of a loaf. And sniffles as tears run down their face. Because this is the first time they've understood the weight of what this meal represents. This is what he meant. This is a leap of faith. Let's pray. God, we thank you for sending Jesus. And it is unimaginable for us to fully comprehend what he went through as he journeyed to the cross and ultimately was placed in a tomb. Father, help us in our unbelief as we remember what Jesus did for us. And Father, may we take a leap from unbelief to belief and live out what you've called us to do. We pray these things in Jesus' name.